We're going to be talking about Gen AI evaluation, but more specifically, an approach that helps us better identify and understand where improvements are necessary and how we can take action. My name is Shane Johnson. I am responsible for product marketing here at Snorkel, but please don't use that marketing term and hold that against me. I'm still a developer at heart, and thankfully, I'm joined by Rebekah Westerlind, who is a software engineer. Rebekah, would you like to say hi to everyone?
Hey everyone.
Fantastic. All right, we'll get in here. Maybe conceptually, it seems like it should be an easy thing to do, right? Is our AI doing well or not doing well? But at the end of the day, there really is no silver bullet, right? No simple thing you can do, to have confidence that you can move this AI into production. But we know how to go about it, right? We know the right steps, we know the right tools, and that's what we want to show you today. So, three things to keep in mind. These are going to be our focus here for a little while until Rebekah shows us a demo in a little while. Is specialization, fine-grained metrics, and actionable insights. That is how we think about Gen AI evaluation. And we're going to dive into each one of these in a little bit more detail, starting with the specialization. If you're familiar with LLM benchmarks, there's quite a few out there. Every time we see a new foundation model released, you'll often see the leaderboards, five, six, seven, the most well-known benchmarks, and any new foundation model is obviously here to say, hey, look, we're scoring higher than the previous, model in these different benchmarks. They're great for understanding the core capabilities of foundation models. And they typically get categorized into the list you see here, right? In some way, shape, or form. And certainly this isn't necessarily exhaustive, but these are some of the core principles that foundation models, are trying to adhere to, right? Making sure that they're accurate, fairness, right? We don't want to see, negative things, harmful behavior in our AI. So these are useful from a foundational perspective, but they're not very useful from an enterprise perspective. If you think about, let's say a very simple question, customers interacting with an AI agent and they ask, hey, what time does, the nearest store open for me? The AI agent could respond back and say, yeah, go check the website. I mean, technically, it's accurate, right? The hours are probably posted on the website. I don't think I would call it toxic. It may even be, explainable, but I'm sure from an enterprise perspective, someone is saying, no, that is not the way to respond to this particular question. And so we think of it as kind of twofold. Certainly, there are these, generic, categories, right, that we want to measure our LLMs in, but then there's this whole other separate side when it comes to enterprise use cases, right? They might have very specific security policies, right, around PII and sensitive data. There might be, a whole battery of internal corporate policies, industry regulations, right? What you can say, what you can't say, how you should say it, brand guidelines. These are examples, but every enterprise is probably going to have its own definitions of how responses should be formulated and communicated to customers, right? Arguably no different than the SMEs, right? If you have a call center and a number of customer support representatives, they've probably all been trained to interact and communicate with customers in a very specific way. If you are building an AI copilot or an AI assistant to engage customers, you obviously want it to follow those same guidelines and policies. And that's kind of how we're thinking about evaluation with respect to enterprise AI. And so how we go about that, and don't worry, Rebecca will go into more detail on this than I'm going to here. One option, on the left is to have SMEs, annotate every single response, but that's not particularly scalable. If you had, 500 to 1,000 reference prompts and responses, and you ask the team of SMEs to rate those responses, for lack of a better word, one, not particularly scalable. especially if you're doing this on a frequent basis. And two, you might even see some variation, right, of different people ranking things differently, right? So it's starting to get a little tricky. Our approach on the right is the notion of evaluators, right? And these are kind of custom to your use case, right, or domain. Some of them are simply heuristics, and I think of this as rules that are in SMEs' heads that help them make decisions. So if I'm an SME and I'm asked to look at a response, what's going on? How am I coming to the decision that I should accept or reject this response? And you see a little example there. Maybe there is a corporate policy that we're not allowed to mention customers, right? We certainly shouldn't be recommending, or sorry, competitors. We shouldn't recommend to one of our customers that they should see one of our competitors, right? That might be an obvious no-no. Leveraging predictive models, right? In this case, and we'll see another example of this a little bit later, a very common one might be tone, right? An answer could be correct and it may not be toxic, but like the one I said earlier, go check the website, dude. That is probably not going to, pass of the tone that the business is looking for. And of course, LLM is a judge, right? We can look at foundation models to help us. In this example, this is a nice one in terms of RAG, where we might use, the latest foundation model to help us understand, is this response derived from the context, right? If it's not, it's probably hallucinating. And certainly we can go into even more granular details of, is the response, based on this chunk, right? How much of this chunk is, dictating the response? So these are a combination of ways that we can implement some of that criteria that the enterprise and the use case needs to better understand whether we can move forward with this AI solution or not. The next part is fine-grained metrics, and here's kind of a little example of a more primitive approach where say we had a set of reference prompt response pairs. We do an evaluation of those, and someone says it's 74% accurate. It feels good, but you don't really know the consequences of the other, what, 26%? Are those failures the types of failures that can cause you to lose customers, that could lead to a lawsuit, really bad press? Or are they small things that may be less significant, or maybe they're not fully accurate? It just doesn't tell you enough about the risk and whether you can move forward. And part of that we see kind of on the right here. We're not, no more than we want a metric that tells us, globally how our AI is performing, nor do we want, metrics on any single individual prompt and response, right? Neither of those things are really what we're looking for. What we're trying to find is clusters or groupings that represent an error or an area that we can improve on, right? So we're trying to get something that's a little more insightful to us, and we do that through the notion of data slicing. Uh, the way I think about data slicing is when you call, a 1-800 support number, and I'm sure we've all been there before. Press 1 if you have, a problem with billing. Press 2, if you have a problem with payments, right? You're going to go through this thing. Hopefully, you're not just jamming on that 0 button because you become frustrated at some point. And you're trying to speak to an operator, but the logic is right, right? From their perspective, they want to better understand what your question, concern, or interest is, so that they can better route you to the right person to help you with that. That's how I think about slices as well. So if I were building an AI assistant, the example you see here, I might want to create a slice for disputes, right? When someone is, for example, disputing a charge on their credit. I might look at administrative questions. This could be, when someone wants to change their billing date, or when they want to reset their password, right? Whatever it might be. To maybe even toxic questions, right? People are asking things that they shouldn't be, that could cause maybe legal risk for us or concern, even different languages. We're trying to create categories of prompts so that we can find out if there are issues in those specific categories. And so the way we implement this on the left is, kind of very simple rules that you can use to place something within a slice. So you might have, a battery of dispute terms, and it's just a simple, think of something like a keyword search or a regular expression, right? Are these seen in, the prompt? And hey, this is, a dispute. We also might have a predictive model, right? Something we built in house to let us know, if a prompt or response is toxic, right? And to keep an eye out for that. Then we do our evaluation, right? We do it globally. And yes, you would have those high level metrics, 75% response accuracy for, your AI. But on the right, you'll see that we can glean more information now that we have these slices, right? I might look at my admin questions and realize, what, we're actually doing pretty well there. With that, the disputes and questions, room for improvement, disputes especially room for improvement. And it might also be a very sensitive area of the business where we could actually encounter, some serious problems if we're handling those really poorly. So this is the importance of slicing, right? We want to look beyond the surface to understand what areas is our AI system doing well, right, and where is it not. And then finally, it needs to be actionable. And this is certainly a big part of our approach and philosophy here at Snorkel. But if we kind of went back a few slides and I told you that your model was 74% accurate, it may or may not be good enough for production, right? That's going to depend on your requirements. But, regardless, if you're trying to get to 80, 90, 95%, that metric alone won't really tell you what to do, right? You just know that there's room for improvement. And so when we look at evaluation, we look at it very specifically as a means to find specific types of errors and where they're occurring, and then connect those to approaches which can resolve them, right? So, for example, we might have evaluators that are very oriented towards RAG, right? Is the chunk used for the response, what percentage of the chunk is used for the response? Is the response based entirely on the context? If we see, failures here, then we can obviously look at, okay, we need a better chunking algorithm, or maybe we need to fine tune our embedding model. Some different errors will lead us to do different things. And if we can have a UI and a workflow and experience that bridges that gap, then we can better accelerate the process, right? We can get from that 74% to a 95% much, much faster and more reliably if the connections are made. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Rebekah. She's going to go a step deeper and actually help us understand how we approach and implement this within Snorkel Flow.
Thank you, Shane. So as mentioned, I'm Rebecca, and I will be walking you through the workflow today, and then I will be demoing that workflow within our product Snorkel Flow. So we'll try to make this a little bit more tangible and give you the tools that you need to implement these philosophies. So here's a comprehensive overview. And don't worry if these pieces don't make sense yet. We're going to walk through each step together. So step one here is onboarding. And here within onboarding, you're going to do a couple different things. You're looking at the artifacts that you'll want to use throughout the workflow, and you're defining those. So here are 4 different artifacts that you're going to want to start by defining. And we have smart defaults available for all of these. So you can get started right away, or if you want to customize, you can add your own or edit and tweak existing ones. So I'll walk through each of these 4 artifacts. At the top here, we have criteria. And so you can think of this as an axis that you care about, right? So Shane talked about correctness, completeness, robustness, fairness, kind of all of those general ones, and then also ones that are specific to your use case, right? So maybe don't mention competitors or don't contain PII in your response. So you'll define those axes you care about. Then you'll define your evaluators. And you can think of an evaluator as a function that will take in a data point. So here, this LLM response, and then I'll return true or false, depending on whether or not that data point matches the associated criteria. So you'll have an evaluator for each of your different criteria, and it'll check whether or not you're aligned with that criteria. Third, we have reference prompts. And so these prompts should be a set of all the types of questions that you want your model to be able to perform well on. As you iterate on your model, the responses will change. Hopefully, they'll be getting better as you're improving your model. But these prompts should stay relatively stable. And the prompts can be collected, they can be curated, authored, generated. Maybe you have human agents that are currently doing what you're training this model for. And so you could use historical queries. So all the questions that these human agents are getting asked to create this set of reference prompts. Or maybe you have a chatbot that's doing it and you're just trying to improve this chatbot. So you can use these user query streams, all of the questions that chatbot's getting as this set of prompts. You can also pull in your subject matter experts here and they can write a golden set of prompts. So lots of different ways that you can gather these prompts according to whatever works best for your use case. And then finally, we have data slices. So Shane explained this a bit, but we'll show this in the product. An example here is maybe you have a slice that you're going to call transfer to agent. And these are all the questions that the chatbot should just transfer to an agent. Don't try to answer it. But give it straight to the human. So that's an example of a data slice that you might define. Awesome. So once you've defined all of these artifacts, we move to step 2, and that is evaluate. And in this step, you are running the benchmark. And in our product, you can see here the evaluate page. And in this page, you can see how your model is performing. So the data, those reference prompts that we talked about, as well as all of the responses from your current version of your model, they're fed into this benchmark, and then you can see performance across different slices and criteria. You can see here, you have kind of like an overview of how your performance is trending, and on the bottom in this table, the rows are the different slices, and then the columns are the different criteria and evaluators. So you can see really, really fine-grained, like which criteria and which slice is performing the worst, and kind of act on that. Great. So at this point, you'll look at your benchmark and you'll have a few decisions to make, right? If you just started with all the smart defaults and are kind of just getting started, you're probably not yet fully confident in your benchmark. You might want to add some custom pieces or tweak the defaults. And so now you have a time to iterate on that benchmark, and that's step 3 here. And you'll refine those artifacts that we defined in the onboarding step. And you can refine any of the artifacts. You'll see the 4 that we had before, right? So maybe you got started, you sent it to your boss, and your boss didn't really understand one of the criteria that you had defined. And so they want you to go back and refine that definition. Or maybe the product team is kicking off a new project on dispute management. And so they want you to add a new slice all about questions relating to disputes and to track performance there, right? So there could be a lot of different outside sources from the company who are now chiming in on the project and wanting to change things. I also want to draw our attention to the last artifact here, right? So we have ground truth. And this is really important at this stage to now be collecting ground truth from your subject matter experts. And at this point, you'll have a better idea of where their annotation will be helpful, right? So for example, you might have a really important evaluator and you want to make sure that that evaluator is accurate. And so you'll introduce a mini iteration loop between the ground truth labels and these evaluators. And so when you're at the very beginning and you're not sure yet if you trust that evaluator, you can collect ground truth labels for the criteria that that evaluator is measuring. And then you can look at where your subject matter experts and your evaluators are disagreeing and refine that evaluator to better match this domain expertise that you've collected. And because of this, your subject matter expert time can be very focused, very impactful, exactly where you need it to progress. And they're also, those labels can be scaled up programmatically now from the evaluators. So once you get those evaluators set, you won't have to keep coming back to your subject matter experts and using their valuable time. So once you've done some refinement, you run the benchmark again, right? So we see this iterative loop on the bottom to see your progress. And one of my favorite things about this workflow here is that you're never blocked, right? So it's an iterative loop, and if you're waiting on your subject matter experts to annotate, but your new Spanish data has already come back, you can run the benchmark and work on improving performance over that Spanish data and kind of go through that loop until you get your other annotations back, and then you can incorporate that. So you can always be making progress along some axis. Okay, so once you've run that benchmark again, maybe multiple times, depending on how many times you go through the loop, you now turn your attention to the system itself, and you want to be improving the system to meet production deployment ready standards. And there's many pieces of this system, right? So you can see here we have listed out prompt retrieval and generation. And your system might have different components, but these are pretty common components that we've seen across a lot of the customer work that we've done. There are ways to improve each of these pieces of the system, right? So we have a prompt development workspace where you can refine your prompts, refine the examples. We have some RAG tuning so that you can maybe tune the embedding models or improve chunking. And then we also have a generation, so that LLM itself, you can fine tune. And each of these pieces of the system, you're probably going to have to go in and tune to get the best possible performance. And we help with each of those. For the demo today, we'll focus on the last one, LLM fine tuning, and how you can do that in our product. So once again, this is an iterative process. You'll tweak your system, refine it, develop it, and then you'll rerun this benchmark and you'll see how your performance has improved across each model iteration. And once you get to a satisfying performance, you're ready to deploy to production. And so if we go here, yeah, I'll pause for a moment here on this slide, and it's the same slide from the beginning, but hopefully now each of these steps make sense, that you go from onboarding to evaluation to refining that benchmark, and you can iterate in this bottom loop, and then once you're satisfied with your benchmark, you'll switch and focus on the LM system, and you'll iterate in the top loop until you're hitting the performance metrics that you want, and then you get to deploy to production. So very, very exciting. And we will now transition to the demo.
In this demo, we are going to pretend that we all work for a healthcare insurance company called Be Healthy. We are working to improve a customer support bot that receives questions from our customers about their insurance policies. We want the bot to be able to answer the questions thoroughly and correctly. The first thing we want to do is define what good looks like. This might be done by a subject matter expert, maybe by a data scientist or project manager, but we make it super easy in our product so anyone with any skill set could step in and contribute here. And these are our criteria. In our product, these criteria currently manifest as label schemas. Some of these criteria are generic. They're likely to apply to every use case and are available out of the box from our GenAI cookbook. Some criteria will be more specific. These two are specific to the use case we are looking at today. For this use case, we want to make sure our insurance support bot does not include any PII in any response. If you want to add another criteria, you can do so here. Here at Be Healthy, we want to show our customers gratitude for their business. So I could add another criteria called gratitude and describe it. Once we have defined all our criteria, we can go here to our annotation suite. Here we create batches of data points for subject matter experts to review and label. If we look here at this example batch, we can see all the criteria we have defined on the right. Each one is explained, and we can narrow it down to whichever one we are thinking about right now. The next artifact are reference prompts, and this piece is most likely to be done by the data scientist. So as a data scientist, I could gather these prompts from a variety of different sources, maybe user query streams or historical query logs from human agents, maybe SMEs generating gold standard questions. And once I've gathered or generated that data, I can upload the data to Snorkel Flow as a data source. And we support lots of different integrations, ways to upload your data. I've uploaded the data for us, and we can peek here at our data set to see some examples of the reference prompts used in this example. Can our insurance be terminated? What does the plan coverage look like? And we can also see the responses from our current fine-tuned model. Awesome. Now that I have my data, I want to slice it. I want to look at subcategories that are important to us. So let's go back to our annotation suite and look at our data. And wherever you see your data, you'll also see this little slice of pie icon. If we click on it, you'll see this data point isn't included in any slices right now. So let's add some. You'll see here two different types of slices, manual and programmatic. The programmatic slices are indicated by this function icon. And when you create a slice, you write a function, and then that function is automatically applied across the entire data set. So you don't have to go through and select all the data points you want to include in your slice manually. The function will do it for you. You then have complete flexibility to change the assignments. So for example, the slicing function for topic disputes looked at this question here and said this has nothing to do with disputes. But maybe I disagree. I think I know better, and so I will manually override and add this data point to this slice. And now, if I go back, you'll see that this data point is included in this slice. Or if I want to spot check that my slicing function is making sense, I can filter on a specific slice and see what data points that slicing function is including. So here, the slicing function is including an out-of-network charge. You can see that here. And so I have a gut check here that that slicing function is doing well. Now, if I want to create a programmatic slice, so one of these slicing functions to create a new one, we will do this within the integrated Jupyter notebook that is included as part of our product. Here we are in the integrated Jupyter notebook, and we're still here in step 1, onboarding, and we want to look at creating some of these data slices. So all of the tools that are available for writing labeling functions are also available for writing slicing functions. So prompts, embeddings, heuristics, like dictionaries or keywords or regular expressions. We can use all of these tools to create data slices. And typically these slices are written over the prompts, or the inputs. So in this use case, they would be written over the questions field. And we have a lot of different options of slices that we've created here. And the one that I will talk about is this Spanish slice here. We want to track our performance on responses in Spanish. So we've written a function that loads this fast text model, and for each question response, the model looks at it, and if it predicts that the question is in Spanish, it will add that data point to the Spanish slice. We can also create programmatic slices using templates. So here are some regex templates. You can use these over the question fields to find any data points that have to do with disputes or any out-of-network charges. So we have covered 3 of our artifacts so far. We went over our criteria, our reference prompts, and our data slices. And now we have a very exciting artifact, evaluators. And these will be written by your data scientist, so we'll stay here in the notebook. And to refresh everyone's memory, these are functions that take in a data point and then return true or false to indicate if that data point meets a specific criteria. You could have an evaluator for your politeness criteria that takes in a data point and then tells you, yes, this is a polite response, or no, this is not a polite response. And there are default evaluators that are very easy out of the box and quite generic. And this could be something like accuracy. So the accuracy evaluator would simply take in a data point and then tell you whether or not it thought the response was accurate. And we have a cookbook here that gives you generic evaluators like that. But generic metrics and generic evaluators are not enough. Evaluators need to be fully customized to your use case and your criteria. So anything you can think of, you can actually write as an evaluator here in our Jupyter notebook with our extensive SDK offerings. I'll walk through creating a simple heuristic-based evaluator as well as a more complex LLM as a judge. So the heuristic-based evaluator is for the mentions competitors criteria, and essentially we just say, here are competitors, we don't want you to mention them, and we register that. For simple criteria, heuristic evaluators make sense. For criteria that are more complex and nuanced, heuristics are not powerful enough to completely capture the criteria.
And in this case, we can use an LLM as a judge. LLM as a judge asks an LLM to stand in as a proxy for your subject matter expert. So to do this, you create a prompt template that includes a place for a prompt, a place for a response, and a place for what criteria makes a good response. In this process, we ask the judge to evaluate whether the prompt response pair meets the criteria. So in this case, the criteria focusing on completeness. And the process can use any underlying LLM, and you can iterate on the exact wording of this prompt template to better reflect the judgment of your SMEs. So you can see in this example, we're asking this LLM to judge whether or not the response is complete. And we've given it a description of this completeness criteria. Awesome. So now we've defined a couple of evaluators, and that wraps up this step 1 of onboarding, right? So we've defined all of these different artifacts. Now we can move to step 2, which is evaluate. This is super easy, super fast, and we can essentially just run this benchmark with this one single command. We will now hop over to our evaluate page in the UI to see how our benchmark is performing.
So we just ran our benchmark, and now we're here in the evaluate page looking at all of our reports. This is the report that we just created, right? So this baseline report, and we're going to click in and look at it. And you'll see here that the rows represent the slices and the columns represent the evaluators on each criteria. And we're now in step 3, which is benchmark development. So we want to be looking at this benchmark and noticing things we might want to refine. So let's start here on the left and walk through it. Okay, we have coverage. We have 100% on all our data, right? That makes sense. All data is 100%. Now we have 77% of our data that does not have a slice assigned. So one thing we might want to do is think through which subsets of our data we care about and write some new slices. Okay, we have about 5-6% of our reference prompts. The question is too verbose. We have 0% coverage for Spanish. So this means that we actually don't have any Spanish data in our reference prompts. And this is important. We created this slice because we are looking to expand to South America. But if we don't include any Spanish data in these reference prompts, we have no idea how we're performing. So let's fix this. We could reach out to all of our SMEs and say, does anyone speak Spanish, and get them to write some questions to add to our reference prompts. Unfortunately, all of our SMEs are busy right now. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take some of our existing reference prompts and translate them to Spanish just so we can get started, get ourselves unblocked, and get some sense of how we're doing. Okay, so we're back here now looking at our data sources, and I have taken those questions that we translated and I've uploaded them as a new data source. So once you've added this new data source, you will rerun the benchmark and we'll go back to evaluation and look at it. So this is one iteration of that benchmark development. So that lower iteration loop that we saw in the workflow, we've just done. We added data to the reference prompts to make a slice more represented, and now we'll look at the benchmark. Okay, so here's our new report with the Spanish data, and let's look at it. And awesome. Yep, we now have some data in that Spanish slice, right? Not a lot, it was just 9 rows, but something to get us started. And now let's look at this benchmark and see if there's anything else that we might want to iterate on. Let's see here. Okay, so we have this LLM as a judge for the criteria completeness, and we can compare it here with the ground truth, right? So maybe we want to dive in and do this just side-by-side comparison here. And you can see that we actually have no idea how our LLM is doing. It could be giving us 20 as it is. It could be saying 75. We have no way to check if that's correct. And so what we want to do here is collect some ground truth. So pull in our subject matter experts in a very focused, impactful way and say, we need ground truth on the completeness criteria to be able to understand how our evaluator is performing and if we should trust this evaluator. So what we can do is we can go back and create a batch to do that. Okay, so we'll create a new batch here, and we want to focus in on this completeness criteria. So we can just do that. Fill in a couple more things here. We don't need a lot of data points. We can assign it to me, and we'll create that batch. And now what we can do is we'll go into that batch and we'll annotate it to get some completeness ground truth. You can see here, we have the completeness criteria on the right-hand side and none of the others, right? So I can just stay very focused on completeness, and I can look at the instruction prefix. I can look at the response, read the whole response, then look at any context chunks that are pulled out to generate this response. And maybe I say, okay, you know what, this looks complete. I'll hit 1, it'll accept it, go to the next one. So maybe I go through and I label a bunch of these, right? Just really quickly. Now if I go back to my batch, all right, I labeled 14. Let's say that somebody else came in and reviewed them and said, oh yes, Rebekah's a great annotator, and we're just gonna commit this as ground truth, right? And then we hit commit. And once we've committed that ground truth, we can rerun the benchmark again and take a look at it. So once again, we're looking at all of our reports, and we have this new report from after we added completeness ground truth, and so let's take a look at it. Here we are, and let's focus in on this metric. And awesome. Okay, now we have some ground truth for the completeness criteria, and we can compare the ground truth, what our subject matter experts are saying, with the LLM as a judge evaluator. And you can see there's a pretty big difference here, right? Our LLM as a judge thinks that about 20% of our responses are complete, whereas our SMEs think 77. Clearly, something is happening here. Maybe we want to go back to our evaluator and ask some subject matter experts to look at the prompt and what are they noticing that's different that we missed, or go back and introduce that little mini iteration loop that we had talked about.
As a specific example of how we can iterate on an evaluator, we can come back here to our integrated notebook and go into our evaluators and look at this LM as a judge, and we could tweak a few things. So maybe we could pick a different base model. Maybe we think this base model is not performing how we want, or we could read through this prompt and say, oh, this is actually the wrong column. This is not actually the column that has the context. It's actually context real. Or you might notice something in the description of the criteria that you want to change. So maybe you're actually not seeing a lot of jargon and you're saying maybe this is confusing the LLM, and so you could delete that. So those are a couple of specific examples of ways that you might iterate on the evaluator itself. And if we come back here to the report, we'll notice a couple more things.
You'll also notice here that Spanish and premiums both are really small slices. So our SMEs actually didn't see any data in those slices when they were annotating, so we don't have any data there. And this is a really great way to build confidence in your evaluators, right? Once you've iterated a few times and your ground truth is lining up with your evaluator, you now can trust that evaluator, and going forward, you don't need to work on the ground truth. You can just scale up using the evaluator. For the sake of time, let's just say that we've done those 2 iterations of benchmark development, and now we love our benchmark, and we're going to shift focus to our LLM system. Here in step 4, system development, and there's several things that we can refine in the system. And for the demo today, we're going to be doing some fine tuning. So we have an integration with AWS SageMaker. You can set up the integration. And then here is an important part. So you can curate the data set that you'll use to fine tune. So you can say we have this distilled model that is really good at determining if a response is complete or not, and we want to get just the data points that it accepts with confidence greater than or equal to 90%. And then we'll take those data points, and those will be the data points that we feed in when we run this fine-tuning job, right? So we can pick the good examples and run it, and then pull the data back in and rerun evaluation. Now that we've done that, let's see if it can get any better at having complete responses. All right, we're back here in our evaluate page, and let's dive into this most recent benchmark. And we can now compare across fine-tuning iterations. So we can compare models. We have our first experiment and our second experiment, and awesome! We can see that this completeness evaluator has improved its performance by 70%. That's incredible. We love to see these green deltas. We can actually see that this heuristic evaluator for mentioning competitors, it's down by 9%, which is great, right? Because we actually don't want to be mentioning competitors. So we're also doing a lot better by eliminating all mentions of competitors here. Really fantastic. If we keep looking, ground truth, okay, so this is our ground truth evaluator on the criteria completeness. Interesting, right? There's no data for this new experiment, this new iteration. And that makes a ton of sense because the fine-tuned model generated completely new responses. And so all of the ground truth that our subject matter experts had annotated earlier is now irrelevant. And so if we were just relying on the manual ground truth annotation, we'd have to start all over here, right? We'd have no idea how we're performing. We'd have to go back, find more time, and do that. But thankfully, we iterated on our evaluator previously, and so we already know that we can trust it and we can just have it be scaling up our SME expertise. And we can very quickly, immediately know how we're performing across these different slices and across these different criteria. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us to this evaluate homepage. And this is the page that as a data scientist, you're going to show everyone who's asking you questions. All right, so let's look at it. Okay, amazing. First version, about 12%, not great. Second version, 90%. As a data scientist, I love having something that's quick, easily digestible, that I can show to anyone who's curious. I also love having this recent iterations table on the right-hand side. So this will show us the 10 most recent iterations, and you can see the technical steps that we've done to get where we are, right? We started at baseline, we refined our reference prompts by adding data for underrepresented slices. We refined our benchmark by adding ground truth to check our evaluator. We fine-tuned a model to get new responses. So really good summary here. And then we have that most recent report here that we were just looking at where you can, compare models and see the happy improvement. So once we're satisfied with our performance across all these different metrics, right? Good for competitors to be going down, and then we liked completeness going up. We're satisfied. Now we get to deploy.
To wrap up the demo, I'll take us through this well-defined evaluation workflow again. First, onboarding. Second, evaluation. Third, benchmark development. And then fourth, system development. And in step 1, onboarding, in this demo, you saw us define the artifacts used throughout the workflow. These artifacts include criteria, reference prompts, slices, and evaluators. Then we moved to step 2, evaluate. In this step, we ran our benchmark to give us an initial baseline. From here, we progressed through the steps in iterative loops. As we refined pieces of the benchmark or the system, we returned and reran our evaluation suite to see how our performance improved. The benchmarks give us immediate fine-grained feedback on how our model is performing. And finally, when model performance satisfies our pre-established goals, we deploy. And that concludes the demo for today. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to this webinar and listening to that workflow, some of the philosophies, as well as that demo.
Awesome. That was great, Rebekah. I think the timing is also pretty great too, because we should have a few minutes here to answer some questions that started to come in. And I'm going to repeat some, although I know you were tackling some for us in the background here. But one of the first ones that came in was, can prompts be in multiple slices? And the answer is yes, right? So they can overlap. Sometimes for examples, it's easier when we show some that don't overlap. But when I think about that one earlier, disputes in Spanish, it could have been a dispute in Spanish. It's certainly something that can happen. The other question that I came in that I thought was really interesting as well. The data slicing function looks like an additional piece of metadata in the retrieval vector database construction. And I just wanted to comment on that one a little bit because we did our weekly demo yesterday on RAG optimization. And so I think the two things that occurred to me here are that one, yes, in a sense, it is metadata, right? So we have this, prompt response pair. And when it's sliced, mentally, I just think of it as we're adding metadata to that pair, right? That it's in this slice. I wouldn't necessarily think about that specifically as something to use as metadata or keywords in our vector database. But what I did want to add is that another kind of one of the capabilities in the product we hinted at earlier in terms of actioning issues. And so amongst the RAG optimizations is we do have an advanced chunking algorithm that is able to much better break up your documents into kind of tighter whole, pieces. So you don't see paragraph sentences or bullets or tables getting split, arbitrarily. And as well as the ability to extract information from those chunks and to label those chunks. And that will get you to what you were asking about. So if you feed us, say a whole bunch of PDFs that are sitting on S3, we can chunk them and then we can actually extract information from them and tag them. And then, yes, you would take those chunks and those labels and you can insert them into your vector database to do keyword-based filtering as well. So I know it's slightly off topic, but such a great question because it kind of coincided with my talk track yesterday. So I wanted to touch on that one, but I have a few more here for you, Rebekah. The first one is, did you train the LLM for customized evaluation?
So we're using a couple different LLMs in this process. So you have your LLM that you're like, maybe it's a chatbot or whatever it is, that you're using to in your workflow, right? So that's the one that you're working on throughout the entire time. And that one you're not training specifically for evaluation, because it has some business objective that you are hoping that it will achieve. The LLMs that we use throughout the evaluation process, we refer to them here as LM as a judge. And those ones, they're essentially, you can use like any base model LM to start with, and then you do tune it. There's many different things you can do to help it be better at evaluation. So you can take those LM as a judge uh, LLMs, and you can fine tune them, you can distill them, you can prompt them very specifically. You can give them certain guardrails to make sure they're better at evaluation. So you can do several things to make those LMs better at evaluation than they are just out of the box.
Yeah,
Hopefully that answered the question, but yeah, feel free to chime in, or if you asked it, we can also go back and forth a little bit.
yeah, I think an interesting one, kind of add on that is I think fine tuning the LLM as a judge is probably the last step in the process. I think most people are going to start by prompt engineering, right? Can you improve the prompt to solicit, a more accurate response? And that, well, I wouldn't necessarily say rag, in a technical sense. Part of that prompt engineering might be including content from things like policies and best practices and kind of anything else that might inform, the LLM as to how it should judge this response based on your criteria. So certainly possible. Probably not the first step, though. You might want to see what you can accomplish with prompt engineering first. Although I think we kind of hinted at it briefly, Rebekah. I don't know if you want to touch on this one a little bit more. Is probably the use of predictive models, and then our quality model is kind of maybe not quite in the LLM camp, but we are building predictive models which can help us also better evaluate or judge those results.
Yeah, this is a really exciting area, actually. And part of what's so exciting about it is just the scale, right? So like LMs, when you use them at scale, you can still run into some cost hurdles, or some latency hurdles. And so when you're able to build a predictive model, or even they're called small, like SLM, small language models, you're able to overcome a lot of those, and you can streamline your pipeline. So when possible, it is nice to be able to take all of the amazing knowledge in this LLM, and then pull the important parts into a predictive model or an SLM.
Can you comment on the difference between evaluation in the development stage for, say, prompt or retrieval tuning versus evaluation in real time inside workflow for real-time LLM evaluation of the freshly generated result before presenting to client? Would you treat these two differently? So it sounds like maybe the difference between, for lack of a better word, I'll say offline evaluation or non-production evaluation versus is there a role for evaluation in a deployed, application?
I mean, absolutely. That is an important piece. I think often it falls under the category more of monitoring, and so you'll have uh, lots of monitoring systems that make sure that, like, right, your system is up and working and the performance is good, like speed performance. And then also a piece of it is making sure that you're not seeing regressions in these answers once it's deployed. And so I think that probably the system mechanisms would be a little different in those two cases, right? In this development phase versus this production monitoring phase. But all of these evaluators that we've talked about, you could introduce also in this monitoring phase, and quickly on a generated response say, okay, are we passing a baseline? If not, reject it, flag it, escalate it, whatever it is, if they're not hitting the performance metrics that we want.
Yeah, and I think one of the capabilities we've been discussing with customers lately as well, something that we're kind of actively approaching, is also a mechanism to collect those interactions from a production environment in Snorkel Flow, to do not necessarily in real time, but so that we can continue to collect reference prompts that are happening in the real world. My guess is if you're doing real time, you're going to want to approach that pretty carefully, depending on kind of the impact of latency. But certainly, when I think about expanding our set of reference prompts over time, we do want to begin to collect some that are actually, being sent on behalf of customers, right? How they're using the system. Given the workflow that you've presented to us today, um, how might we go about monitoring regressions in LLM app answering? Kind of in the context of your workflow.
Yeah. So this workflow I think is awesome for regressions because once you've built out this benchmark that you're able to run, um, you can run it super easily, right? So you've invested that upfront development cost. And so if you have an LLM app and you're worried that there are regressions, you can rerun the benchmark on whatever the most recent version is, and you can immediately get that feedback.
Here's another one I think we'd probably tackle. Is there any chance the model will hallucinate when we input the same prompt again and again because each time the responses will be different?
Yeah, so this is a problem that kind of we see with a lot of different LLMs, right? They can hallucinate. And you can do some different things to tackle that. In terms of the evaluation workflow, right? Essentially, like our goal is to build a framework such that we're able to flag these hallucinations. And so you will see hallucinations, and honestly, you'll probably want to have some hallucinations included in this development data so that you're ready for when these pop up, right? Like you want to make sure that your evaluation system is correctly identifying, classifying them so that if they ever pop up in production, you'll know and you'll be able to give that feedback to your LLM. So absolutely, a very high probability you'll see this, and that's something that the system is built to be able to recognize and help you respond to accurately.
How important is the quality of data in order to train LLM models perfectly? And I'll be honest, I'm not sure if we're talking specifically, LLM as a judge or maybe our generative model. But I guess you could argue it doesn't matter either way. How important is the quality of the data, Rebecca?
So important. As Shane mentioned, this is something we feel really strongly about, right? Like the differences now that we're seeing going forward in our models is all about what you feed into them, all about the data. Uh, and you want it to be your high quality data. And coming in, you don't need tons and tons of this high quality data, right? You can come in with some maybe mediocre quality data, and then you'll also want to have some. It doesn't have to be a ton, but you will want some of this golden highest quality data, and you'll want to evaluate with both of these types of data, some really good, some mediocre, maybe some really bad, because your model needs to be able to see the differences between these types of data to be able to know, oh, okay, this is what good looks like. And so the quality of data is always really important, and we understand that it can be really hard to get high quality data. And that's a lot of what this workflow is designed around is how do we scale up that high quality data so you can use your experts, right? There's nothing going to be nothing better than your subject matter experts in either generating that data or just identifying that high quality data. And so you really want to keep the human in the loop for that, and then we can scale up from there. And once you have a little bit of really good data, we can take it the rest of the way. But yeah, data is key here.
I think one thing I'll add before we wrap up here is, we didn't get it to cover it today, in a lot of depth, but in terms of quantity, a lot of these workflows in Snorkel are also designed to help you kind of go from nothing to something. So not everybody has a training data set available out of the box, right? Or a list of reference prompts, or training data for an embedding model. That's fully understood, right? I mean, if you have it, fantastic, right? Bring it to the table. But if you don't, that isn't something that you have to be concerned or feel like you're stuck on, right? It is designed by its nature to kind of capture, SME domain knowledge, right? And kind of that institutional knowledge, and then use that to help you build out these data sets through different workflows and different processes. So evaluation is certainly a big piece of what we talk about, but we also, we'll talk about RAG optimization, we'll talk about LLM fine tuning, we'll talk about curating labeled data. So there's kind of a range of capabilities that are in here all around, this notion of Gen AI and building something and getting it deployed into production. So yes, we want super high quality, but you don't have to start with a large amount of data to get there, right? Even if you have very little or next to no data, we can still help you get to that point of the right amount of high quality data. And thank you, Rebekah, for joining me and for putting together this demo. So that was fantastic.